Right. We are gathered here today to discuss Eloquent Rage by Brittney Cooper. The subtitle is what I was looking up briefly because I am so bad at that sort of stuff. I'm very good at remembering concepts and ideas, not so good about remembering like the specific words. But I thought that her subtitle is pretty important. Black feminist discovers her superpower. So I was thinking that today maybe we could get our conversation started with a couple of questions, like how familiar were you with Brittney Cooper before this book, and how did this book come into your life? Somebody, anybody? I'll say that like this is a book that had been on my list. Ooh, I see hands. This book had been on my list for a long time. I was like, I should read, and I don't remember how it came onto my radar, but I would bet money that it came onto my radar via Twitter. Because I have followed her for a while and like have seen commentary that she's made on things as they're happening in the day to day. But then I was like, okay, this is an opportunity to read this book. But I saw your hand, Emily. So I would like to know how this book came into your life.
Well, I knew about this book and I had been interested in this book since it came out, but I had not. I'm glad that we're doing this because this was my opportunity to read it too. But it's funny because I thought that I wasn't familiar with her, but then I remember she talked about the blog that she started, the Crunk Feminist Collective. And I was like, oh my gosh, like back, like circa 2007, whenever it was, that I was like really into like reading and writing feminist blogs. Like I so remember that blog. So it was cool to see like someone who I like kind of like saw her career at like one point, and then it's cool to like watch how it's unfolded.
What about you, Jackie?
I also didn't know I was familiar with her. I have this really strong memory of seeing Eloquent Rage on the book display at Westgate, and that was how it originally ended up on my to read list. But I had seen her TED Talk. So it turns out I did know her. I just didn't put together the name until I started reading the book.
So what was your experience with the book? Or you know what? I'm going to ask something different because I bet that this is a book where I bet that this question will have an answer for everyone, and it may be different for everyone. I need a drum roll of suspense. What was your favorite essay in this book? Or like a different way of looking at that question is like which essay like spoke to you more than the others?
This is really hard.
Yeah, this is
I think this is really hard. I was talking to Emily yesterday and saying that I was rereading chapter 2.
Which one is that? Remind me.
Chapter 2. Oh, darn. What's the title of it? Anybody
capital
remember?
B, capital B, capital F, that one?
Yeah.
It's Strong Female Leads. Is it the one about Hillary Clinton?
No, that's chapter 3, which was
it's capital B, capital B,
okay.
capital F. Yeah.
Okay. She goes, that chapter, I had so many like little sections, little like phrases that she had highlighted or that she said that just stood out to me. Talking about her experience growing up as a girl and like her experience with girl friendships. And that was just something that like thinking about our girl friendships. And I think in chapter 2, she also talks about Beyonce and chapter 2, she talks about Beyonce and Beyonce's like relationship with feminism and like Black feminists like interaction with Beyonce. And she has this she like ends the chapter, I want to say, with like talking about how like if feminism had a tagline, it would be like love, like I love being a woman and I love being friends to women. Something I'm not quoting it perfectly, but something to that extent. And that chapter just really was meaningful to me. There are a lot.
I hate to repeat you, Molly, but I'm afraid that that would have been my choice for the chapters too. Also, the discussion about Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just thought the way she went into talking about her relationships with girls and like her friendships with girls, and I don't know, I think for me it was like, she talks about how she really has like always resonated with like strong female leads, and how she has maybe felt like with some of her friendships that maybe she came off as she was being that strong female lead and was sometimes seen as like too much, too whatever. And like she was like looking for that like true friendship with other women, and that like anyone can chime in, but
yeah, well, I think one thing that's really interesting about her concept of female friendship, and then like defining feminism as like, you can't come to the table as a feminist just like if you don't have this deep abiding love for women, and that the way she finds that in her friendships, that's like you know, I mean, she refers to like female friendships as being romantic and being queer, and she just so I just think it's interesting to redefine that as opposed to being like the strong female lead, but as the group of women that you surround yourself with.
I just had this like I remember reading like Anne of Green Gables as a young girl, and like Anne being just like this like very strong, like seeking this like kindred spirit, and I don't know, I just that part of her talking about that, I was thinking to myself like, oh, like Brittney Cooper, I wish I knew you when you were like little. Like I bet you were such a fun person. I mean, you still are, but
I liked one thing that resonated with me was when she talked about, you know, feeling skeptical of women who say that they don't make friends with other women, that they connect more with men, and, you know, sort of questioning, I think putting that back on the woman who says she doesn't make friends with other women, you know, like where is the disconnect, you know, and I felt that one as somebody who's been guilty of saying that in the past. I was like, that's an excellent point, you know. So yeah, that one, I think that's part of why that section resonated with me.
That when she was talking about that, that made me pause too. Like, I don't know if I've ever said that, but I do, you know, I've said many times, like, yeah, I should read more stuff by women. I just don't do it if I don't make a point to do it. Right. And so when I think about that idea, like, I feel like some people say that pretty aggressively, you know, like and I think that phrase means different things based on who is saying it and the context in which they're saying it. But I do think that at the end of it, you know, what is making that phrase tell you about like the way that the speaker is valuing women versus men, right? Like, there aren't very many men that I can imagine saying that
right,
in an aggressive way. Like, I know sometimes a man will say something like that, like, oh, I have a lot of female friends, and they usually in my experience have like tied it to their moms. Like, you know, I was raised by women and I have a lot of women friends. It's usually how that looks when I have heard it. You know, I don't know what other people's experiences are, but like, I don't normally hear that as a club in the way that like sometimes we hear it with women. And sometimes I think that in addition to like thinking about like how women put women versus men in some sort of value hierarchy, I also think that it's a way to try to like bow out of some of the like competition that takes place among women sometimes, right? Like if you're saying like, I don't make friends with other women, you're kind of being like, listen, I don't want to do the things, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to shove myself into the Spanx, push my boobs up to my chin, wear shoes that hurt my feet, and pretend to be interested in what I'm not interested in. I think that that's what that means sometimes.
Yeah.
What I was thinking of is,
which I never would, which I typically don't.
I was thinking when, you know, you walk into a room and, you know, I've said this to men in my life before. I think that women are harder on each other than you know we are on the men that we see, and I think we're harder on each other than men are on us. So, you know, meeting new women and having to, like you said, you know, dress the part and act the part can feel more exhausting, I think, than you know, being introduced to women that you don't see as in competition. But why do we have to view each other that way? Why can't we all be on the same? I mean, you know, if we're often looking at after the same goals, it's just, yeah. I don't know. It made me think about it.
One of the things that like really, and this is jumping way ahead in the book, but you know, I mean, I finished listening to this, I guess, about a month ago. And I just, you know, yesterday and today I've just gone back and revisited a little bit. And one thing that really stuck with me, and I think it's from the White Girl Tears chapter, is what she says about Bill Cosby. And I think that's relevant to, you know, what we're talking about here, because it's like, she was like, you know, I knew that like Bill Cosby was like this Black man who was like crappy to like Black women and like shamed them and berated them for like being bad mothers and all this kind of stuff. But like, I was just kind of used to it. And like, you know, I just like, I took that from a man and like, didn't even think about it. And it wasn't until like, he, like all this stuff comes out about him assaulting white women that I just had to like give up the Cosby Show. And like, you know, that is something that's like really like uncomfortable. I'm sure that was like uncomfortable for her to be like so honest about that. But I think like, I think that gets to like what you guys are saying about just like, you know, sometimes it's just like, I don't know, like we can just be like so used to like people in our peer group being treated like crap. And just because like we're used to that treatment, like we just kind of ignore it or don't take it. And then when we see it happen to someone else, that's like, oh, but yeah, that chapter was like really, was one of my favorites and like really stuck with me since I read it.
I love the way that she makes like a very personal, she shares a very personal experience and then like breaks it down and it analyzes it and provides like the context for like, okay, here's this like experience that like I have, and maybe you had this experience in some way, or maybe one reader did. And then like, this is like actually like the system or like the framework that's like, that this experience is existing within. And I think she does that again in chapter 2, the capital B, capital F, talking about like, I want to say it was what Jackie was mentioning about like choosing men over, you know, being friends with men and not being friends with women. Yeah, I can't remember the specifics, but that there was something to that.
I do feel like that part of this book, in a way, it's like you're getting small bits of a memoir, but she's putting them in there, like you're saying, Molly, to it does help to highlight a greater point. You know, it's like it reminds me of the part with her father when she's talking about like violence that men perpetrate towards women, and like her making the connection between, okay, so my father was in the military and his being in the military gave him, like, for Black men to go into the military gave them a certain power, or I guess like less less powerlessness. But then the trade-off is that they sort of learned this violent behavior, and then they're bringing that back into the community. And then she's like connecting that to her father and his violent behavior. And I just thought that was a really sort of eye-opening and interesting point. And then but the way she introduces it through her own, what happened to her. I just liked the way she put both of those pieces together in all the chapters, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, I really, the way that she just like kind of like is able to take her life and just like, so like, I mean, what it like, that she actually talked about Bill Clinton, right? Or was it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she
Where
talks
she
about
talks about Bill Clinton, and she's like, the reason why I have like don't have a long-term partner is like I'm going to blame Bill Clinton for this. And then she just like totally does it, and she just like totally scaffolds like the whole argument about, you know, the crime bill and everything like that. And like it's she's just so good at being like, here is a particular in my life, and I'm going to like show you how this is like applicable, not like in a like a wishy-washy like everybody's human way, but like my experience is like can be demonstrably tied to these larger things.
She traces it back to an origin where it affected her. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it makes like a really strong connection between the individual and the institution. You know, it's just like this micro piece, but then the whole big macro.
I think that one thing that her technique asks us to do in some way is to think about like, how are we tied to larger institutions and systems, right? Because like she's super conversational, and she's you know, very effectively and deliberately using these elements from her life, but and we're all tied to things, like things that have harmed us and things that have helped us. And I think that that's one of the things that's happening in the background of the book. Like if you want to read a book and like just really take it in and live with it, I think that that's one of the things that she sort of makes us do.
Yeah.
Did this book make you learn anything? This feels like an interview question. What has this role made you learn about yourself? That's what this question sounds like. But what if anything did this book teach you about yourself? Like in reading this book, I realized something that I compliment Black women different than I compliment other people. And I did not know it until I read this book, because she was talking about like the way that she and her friends exchange compliments. And I was like, you do this thing in a way you had no idea. And usually it's just like, usually it's through like people that I see like doing something on Facebook or something, but like the tone that I use is entirely different. And I say entirely different things than I would otherwise say, but I never, ever would have known it if she didn't point it out. But like when I was reading this book, there are specific things that I have said to people, particularly people who I grew up with, that I cannot imagine saying to anybody else. I was like, interesting.
I don't quite know how to say it, but I will, the thing I know I learned, let's rephrase that. The thing I know I learned was from how she talked about, you know, being a feminist and loving other women, and how love for other women feels different than love for other men, and how, you know, there's different kinds of love that all blend together. And I never thought about it that way, but I absolutely realized that I feel that, and I just hadn't put my finger on it.
For everybody else, it should make you stare off into the middle distance for a moment.
No, I think that what you said, Shalanya, about how she almost, well, she is suggesting with each essay that like you yourself do your own work, kind of understanding where your part in each of those systems or each of those like themes, how you're connected. I feel like I just have a lot of like thinking and like personal work to explore. One of the big things that sticks with me was or is the way, so sort of what Jackie was saying about like the love for women and how it's a different type of love. She talks about feminism like coming from like a queer place and like straight women needing to like get over that and like just get over it, you know. It made me think about like intersectionality in feminism in a different way and kind of understand in a different way the like kind of stumbling with my words, but that feminism, like centering the most vulnerable people in feminism, and what that could look like, and the idea of it being like, what is the world that we want it to look? What do we want the world to look like? And how like she talks about white women and in Work Girl Tears, and I just had a different it kind of just like shifted the lens a little bit for me to understand a little bit more about getting out of the way, you know. Not a fully formed thought, but
no, I mean, I would agree with that too, as far as like for white women needing to get out of the way or maybe move into like talk about whiteness in white spaces. And like, I think that, there's a silence around whiteness. Like we don't talk about it. And so that makes white privilege and all the things that go along with it also something that are sort of just the underlying silent norm. And so she does I think she made me realize like I have to do a lot of thinking too, but she reframes things to be like white women, you find these places and spaces where you can use your access and your privilege to move the needle. But Black feminists also have their own thing that they're going to do. Again, I'm not sure I'm saying that in the best way.
The other thing that was like really stuck out to me was the way that her couple of stories that she shared of her experience being in college and having another woman explain to her feminism, like, or how she could be reading about these like feminist writers, and then the experience from when she was like then a mentor to a younger woman. And like that was really educational, just to think about the way that she kind of like listened to the younger woman and was like, oh hey, like this, you might find these things of value, and like having her go through that experience in both those roles was helpful to me in thinking about like how she talks about what percentage of white women voted like didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, and white women like hating Hillary Clinton and that type of stuff, that like content. And then one of the quotes that she said, I'm meandering, but I'll come back to my point. But like she talks about in the chapter about Hillary Clinton, about how her quote is like something like, how could you expect one woman who is fundamentally like part of a system to be completely separate than the system and not like exemplify it? And like one person is not going to break down like hundreds of years of systemic sexism or racism. And I was just like, whoa. Mm-hmm. That analysis is a lot. I'll stop talking.
I think that for me, it was funny because so I listened to the capital B, capital F chapter, and then I was with my partner, and then we both listened to it again while we were driving, and we just like had like the longest conversation because like, you know, like what you guys were saying, just her notion that that feminism is inherently a queer project. And I think that like for me, like as a person who identifies as queer, like I have so often felt like there hasn't been a place for me in feminism because of like, if I do not identify as a woman in a really rigid way, and like, you know, is there a place in feminism for me, or is feminism like this very like insular thing that it's really only for people who are like, who have genitalia that matches their identity and there's no ambiguity about that from a binary perspective. And I think that like listening to that book really helped kind of open the door back into feminism for me. And I would say that that was, you know, I mean, I'm still like this, just like the subtlety of the argument, of her argument, like around like Black feminism being an inherently queer project. Like I'm still like wrapping my mind around it. But like, you know, I think that she just has a way of being like, we can make this really expansive, right? It's like you could just dismiss feminism as this thing that is just like for white ladies who are trying to break the glass ceiling and just trying to get a piece of that pie and not care about anyone else. Or we could actually just like open this door wider and like, and allow more people to come into it. And that was, so like that's something that's definitely just been like kind of like noodling around in my head since I read the book.
I liked her, you guys reminded me of the Hillary Clinton chapter. And one of the things that I find myself thinking about when I think about like this idea of, you know, people being, I feel like a lot of people were super surprised that like women didn't just vote for Hillary Clinton in larger numbers. But one of the questions that I always think about with respect to that is like, if your narrative looks a certain way, right, where it is true to you that women do certain things and women don't do certain things, like I feel like a woman as the president is very threatening to some people, right? Because like you then have to recognize that like this thing is possible to women, which then means that this is just not a thing that you did or could do or wanted to do. And I think that a lot of people are stuck around the question of what do they want, right? Like I think that most people at some time or another time are like stuck if you have to like honestly face that question. And I think that Hillary Clinton's presidency forced that question, right? Because it's like, all right, you know, here is this one person and, you know, who worked for this thing And like, had that happened, I think that a lot of people would have to, I think that it would force some people to have to like look at their choices differently, right? When they see like this big change. And she made me think about it again, like in the way that she was thinking around and talking around Hillary Clinton, as opposed to just saying she didn't go to Wisconsin.
Right. Like it being a more complex.
Yeah, because it's like there's like this idea, like a lot of time, I feel like in some discussions around like Hillary Clinton's candidacy, there's like this idea of what it is that she is to mean to people. And it's like, well, what she means is going to be totally dependent on the individual level, right? And I think that like women got overly, they're all Lego pieces that fit together, and this is the block that they form. And it's like, that's not how that works. And I feel like in the conversation now, like the same sort of talking is happening around Latino voters, right? It's like, well, these are all different people with different backgrounds, different experiences, different relationships to what this system is. And like, why are we, like, it just feels like the same thing to me, right? Like when there's like a big, like how many, like if you think about all the women that they're all real different from each other. Some of them are the same, but they're different. You know what I mean? But when we talk about things that are supposed to symbolize some kind of achievement or advancement for women, capital W, like we forget that things are different. Like some women like played their cards exactly right, for what they want, right? Like if you feel like success in your life is like partnering with the dude who's going to go out and make the most money that he can make while you do whatever you do, like that's a whole different set of that. The calculus is real different than if you're wanting something else. And in a society where a lot of our literature and a lot of our media and all of these things that are supposed to tell us what we want, tell you to want that thing, why then are we surprised if people want that thing, right? Like I think that there's a lot of like conversations that assume common goals for people who just simply don't have them. And I think that that's true. Like actually reading these books and Secession has made me think about that a lot, right? Like I talk a lot about like history and its progress narrative and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, progress narrative for whom? Like some people are like, oh, things are exactly the way that they should be. We haven't lost too much ground. And that is simply their point of view, period. Like that's where they are. And that's the way it is, right? And so I don't know, like part of this is coming out of thinking more about that. Like I think that we all have to decide where we are and then what we do with our cards and what we do with our time and what we do in our families and in our lives. But I think that, she reminded me of the ways that like that kind of thinking just doesn't work. I feel like she exploded it.
As you talked about that, what just now, Charlene, like hearing you also talk about people's choices and kind of like when you have when you witness someone who's like very different from you, and then it's like you are confronted with this situation where like maybe you have to like look at your choices. I feel like she wove that into her book too. Just like thinking about what choices you think you want and then realizing, well, like maybe that's not what I want. She talks about that in her essay about it's about relationships. I forget the title of it. Like being chosen or not being chosen, and like wanting like the suburban fantasy in relationships. Yeah, I thought about that a lot too.
Mm-hmm.
I think about that sometimes, like when I'm in terms of like personal choices or whatever, and like how your life would look different. Like sometimes when I'm like doing something with one of my kids, I'm like, I think I could have been a really excellent housewife, because I think that I could have like poured all of this creative energy, like specifically into like keeping the house and like you know, like doing all these activities and like but then I'm like, but could you have like is that something that you could have done? Like, and do you only think that you could have done that because you went to work and picked up the skills that you think are the skills that you would have used in this other thing? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But you know, seeing other stuff sometimes does make you look at your choices and see, like, that's one of the things I think is so good about her book, right? Because like she like pokes open a whole bunch of doorways. Yes. And then you kind of have to like keep walking down those hallways, right? Because like once you start thinking a little bit about your choices, then you got to start thinking more about your choices. And that's the more about your choices. And that's one of the things that I think is super smart about this book. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, how did it feel to read about the way that she talked about relationships? I thought like this book was super interesting to me in that way. And I was like, you're like, when I was originally reading this, it was like, you're reading this like book by this Black feminist who's like your age. Cause like when I was reading this, I was like, I could smell it. She's my age, you know, just because of what she was talking about and the media she was talking about and just the way that it was. And I think she's like a year younger than I am or something like that, but that is your age unless you're 7. And there was like so much in this book. I think I told some of you guys, like, this is a book that I was like, oh my gosh, a mirror book. And I don't normally feel that when I'm reading. But then like, it made me think like, how are you even going to address the parts of this book that talk about like Black women and relationships when you're probably going to have this conversation with like no other Black women? I'll just ask you guys what you thought about it and just sit back.
Oh man.
I felt like she was super brave to even think about writing about it.
Oh yeah.
She's very brave.
You know, I mean, the one thing that just like stands out to me so much that I love the way that she told it, but was like, when her grandma was like, you need to start having sex. and, like, and that whole conversation was just amazing.
You want to know what happened in my brain when I read that? I just imagined.
I want to know.
A cartoon that's like got like a desert and just a tumbleweed rolling across.
Oh my God.
I like how the grandma goes into detail about how we used to do it. We just go into the woods. I was like, okay, that little piece of the story just made it like a completely believable granddaughter conversation for me, because that's the kind of thing that I could imagine one of my grandparents having said.
And you know that like her grandma knew exactly how uncomfortable this conversation was going to make her.
Definitely.
And was like reveling in it, you know. I don't have anything like brilliant to say about that. Like I just think that like it's stuff like that where like stuff about like relationships and sex in this book, just like it always comes from an angle that you're not expecting, right? So like the chapter on sex is going to be like about her grandma and the church mostly. But again, like getting back to kind of like this, you know, she says in the first, or in the capital B, capital F, that she like identifies as heterosexual, and yet like there's this queer dimension to her friendships. And yeah, I don't know. And then, you know, like I already said, that she talks about like her lack of like a long-term male partner, and she can like talk about it in this larger dimension of like, look at what has happened in the United States in the past 30 years. And this explains a lot. I think
that was really
like,
fascinating.
Yeah. I think it's like, there are these narratives, right? Like these heteronormative like narratives about like, okay, you get to a certain age and then you start having a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and then you find that person and you get married, and and it's like, and it's just the way that she's thinking about relationships and the way that she's experienced relationships is just completely different. So yeah, like it was, I like that. It's just like, I mean, I don't know if that's like what she wants for her life, but I think it, like, just the way that she writes it is really thought provoking, that like just relationships are just going to defy your expectations in this book in terms of how she's thinking about them and describing them.
It's the part where I go look at my piece of paper. So Emily, you talked about this a little bit, but I was curious about like you guys' relationship to the term feminist. Like, is it like a term that you embrace or no, or like maybe you don't want to talk about it, which is fine too. Like what's that? This made me think about that story. Like I have like for me, like when I for a long time, like I don't know, number one, like I'm not at an age in my life or an era in my life where I'm like opening a drawer looking for labels to put on, right? So like I think that this is like, I think I'm kind of like, you are what you do, right? Like that's where I am right now. It's like you are what you do. That's the way, that's what it comes down to. There are all sorts of people who think they're great, and they're trying to be like great, or they think that they're kind, and they're trying to be kind, and you would not convince them that they aren't. But when you watch what they do, that's not what they are, right? Like you are what you do. But she made me think about like it's like some conversation in college when that term was coming up, and I was like, I don't know, I'm not excited about that term. And the person, one of the people in the room was like, well, you believe that you believe in equality. I don't remember how he even said it. And I think that the house of a statement like that is pretty important. And I was like, yeah, sure. And he was like, well, then you're a feminist. And I'm like, I don't know. But like what, like, I think that what this book made me think about is just like, I keep going like this because I'm just imagining like feminist trademark, right? And like there's a certain image that comes to mind for me when I am thinking about that word head on. And I'm like, yep, that's not me. Right. And I was just wondering how other people felt there.
I would say I don't feel that I've earned the designation, that I have friends who I would think of that way, who,
What does
you know,
earning the designation look like to you?
I don't know. I in my mind, there's something I need to do or think differently, or action I need to take, action based, I would say. Right. And I have plenty of friends that I would describe as feminists without any qualms, but I don't think that I could describe myself that way. But I don't know why. So
It's interesting, Shawny, that you mentioned like picturing the word as like in a box with like trademarked, because I think the word means like so many, like just like you're asking the question, it means so many different things to different people depending on what your experiences are, with the word, and like also like words can go through these like evolutions, depending on like how they're treated in popular culture, not to mention the people who like identify with those words. So it's like, I don't know, sometimes when a word becomes like a status versus like what you're saying, like you are what you do versus like earning a certain badge or a certain label. Mm. It's tricky. It's tricky. I think of myself as like striving, working towards feminism. But I like the way that Brittney Cooper talks about like the tagline, you know, of feminism should be like that you love being a woman and that you love being friends to other women. And I like the way that she explores like the Mean Girl stuff, because I feel like the Mean Girl stuff I put in the same box. For me, I put it in the same box as like the trademark feminism, like the corporate feminism, the like we're gonna like make it marketable feminism, versus the like more complicated, like what is your relationship like to yourself and like what you do and like the people that you interact with.
And who do you need to bring down in order to achieve it? You know, like
Yeah, that's a thing.
I like the way you said that, Jackie.
I mean, you know, to bring down yourself, other people, you know, it just, yeah, I don't know. I think that's why, right, like you said, it's complicated for me. And when I say, you know, there's, I guess now in my mind, there's two different sides to earning the label. There's earning the label through actions I would disagree with and dislike. And then there's earning the label through, you know, actions that support, you know, deep held beliefs and are difficult and require introspection. And yeah, it's complicated.
I feel like sometimes I'm gonna talk again, but I think that like I want the word to mean a certain thing, and like I want that word, but I don't want the word as like the trademarked word. But like I want that word, and but what experiences have I had, like, you know, even like the way that my world that I existed, you know, my childhood world was sheltered me or created certain like ideas of like what that word could mean is like different than somebody else. So reading this book really like feels like it helps continue to expand. Again, like you said, opening different doors and being like, oh yeah, did you think of that? Open that up. Like, I don't know.
Nope, not ready for that one.
Yeah. We're going to just put that over there.
Close that one.
Remember, it's down the hall.
What do you guys think about, so when I was reading, you know, like the title of this book is Eloquent Rage, and she tells this whole story about, you know, how her friend, you know, got her together, you know, was like, you're angry, and had this whole thing, and I love that story. But like, you know, and everybody's different. Everybody does not have to take on the same things. Everybody does not have to feel the same way. But like, I just feel super, like, I think that this is great for, like, this framework works for her, but like, I am super uncomfortable with even like thinking about rage in that way. Like, it's
like being perceived as someone with rage.
I don't perceive myself as someone with rage, you know, like I don't see and I don't want to, like, that just
Yeah.
doesn't feel like, I would like to, I would not put that on my buffet of things. I'd be like, you know what, I'm gonna pass on the rage.
No, I would be very uncomfortable if people saw me that way. And yet I love that she's embraced that, and that, you know, that's what she's using to, I don't know, power her emotion, I guess. But right, but why do I have such a problem thinking of myself that way? I blame society.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think that like women in general are not, I mean,
No,
rage
we're
is
supposed to
seen as like
smile.
ugly, right? And so,
Or crazy, you know, like
yeah,
women,
there's just,
you're
Hysterical.
Because
Yeah.
right, that's what I was gonna say, because rage in a woman is hysteria. It can't
Yeah, like
possibly be justified and
right.
and an appropriate reaction. It's, you know, it's
Yeah, so it's like taking, it's
based in
almost like for
crazy.
her, yeah, it's like taking ownership and honing it into something eloquent so that there's this clarity in it. And I don't, like, I wrote this down, I don't know where it is in the book, but she says the collective orchestrated fury of Black women can move the whole world. And I think it's the idea of like that it's orchestrated and working together, but also like maybe not everybody has to feel rage or seem to personify or portray rage, but if you do, then you should be able to own that feeling and use that feeling. And we don't, that's just something that's so specific to women and Black women in general. So
I think that anger is one of the few emotions that is an acceptable masculine emotion. So I also think that it's owned by men. I think it's,
yeah,
you know, we're
absolutely.
allowed to feel hurt and frustrated and, you know, all kinds of other words, but rage, I don't know that women in general are allowed to feel rage. Maybe that's why I feel uncomfortable with with that label.
Yeah, I think that
Now I have it. now I have rage.
I mean,
you've taken a ladle of it and poured it on your.
I'm just gonna mix a little bit in.
There's a lot to be angry about, so you know.
It's interesting because Brittney Cooper talks about like the specific challenges for Black women around anger and rage, and I so appreciated that she started the book with the discussion of sassiness. And she's like, and I don't think she says this directly, but she's like, lest, dear reader, like you think that like this is just going to be a book of like a sassy Black woman. Like, let me tell you what sassiness actually is. Like, it is like how you are enraged and actually survive in a system that like otherwise would not allow you to. And I think that like different types of women are socialized in different ways. And I think that like a lot of white women, it's just like, you're not allowed to feel anger. Like that's right. And it's like the world doesn't come down on you in the same way at all.
Right.
But it's like, you're not allowed to feel anger. So you have to cry, even though you're angry, you have to cry. And then, so you can get this person killed. Right. Like, it's like, you have to be like Amy Cooper, like on the phone, like, it's like, exactly what you're doing. Right. Because like your rage can't, which was obviously in her, case, like completely misplaced, but like, she couldn't just directly express her anger. So she like had to like do this super roundabout thing where she was like trying to like call the cops on this dude and like get him arrested or get him killed. And like, I think that like, it's really, I think that like what this book shows me is I agree, like I'm uncomfortable with rage. I'm uncomfortable with anger. I look at my family history. I know why I'm uncomfortable with anger, but like, it's really important, I think, for all women to kind of like dig into that. Like what's our relationship with that feeling and why?
It's interesting. And I might just be super comfortable too, because I'm like, well, like, I don't want to be labeled the angry Black lady either. You know what I'm saying? And so like, that could be where the discomfort is. It's like, nope, keep your rage out of my house, because I cannot afford to have a single stripe of that on, you know, like, I cannot take that on, because like, you can't get it off. You know what I mean? Maybe that's what it is, right? Like, maybe that's the discomfort, because it's like, nope, you won't catch me reading this book in public, because I want, you know. So it could be that, you know. It's not to say like if I get like, I have like human moments of like, I'm not saying like I don't experience rage at all, but like, just thinking about it as like this thing to embrace just feel like makes me super nervous, because it's just like, ooh, Brittney, you are playing with fire. Like, clearly you know how to work with fire, right? Like, you clearly it's working, but it's like, yo, I don't know that I have those tools, right, to be able to, like, you got a different set of tools in your toolbox than I do. But like, when she, like, in the, you know, you're mentioning the chapter, she's talking about like sassiness, I 100% use humor all of the time, right? It's like, I need to get this thing done, but we're going to laugh our way to the end of it. And that very much is like, I don't want someone to be able to feel like this person was yelling at me, you know, or like this person was mad at me, right? Because like, if there's like this weight of that being a perception that you've got to avoid, I'm just going to be the best at avoiding it, right?
I also think if you're a woman with a particularly intense way of communicating, which I think a few of us are, you know, we may, you know, we may apologize our way through it, right? And that you know, I shouldn't be having this emotion, I shouldn't be displaying this, and therefore I'm going to apologize in a way that I think everybody would understand isn't really truly an apology, but it's a way to sort of bury this emotional reaction that is, you know, we're worried is going to take away power. And yet Brittney Cooper makes it a more powerful reaction.
I was thinking a lot when she talks about rage, about like intensity level, and like, you know, somebody talks about, or she has a story about like a friend telling her that she like loves really intensely, or she feels things really intensely. And again, it's like, it was a door that I opened, and I've been thinking about a lot about my own feelings about anger or rage. I think when I think about rage, I end up thinking about like the cumulative anger over things that are absolutely ridiculous, you know, or like it's the systems that are absolutely ridiculous. And like that like idea of like the hysterical female really being like a woman who is like enraged over, you know, enraged to hysteria because of whatever cumulative circumstances. And I agree with you, Shania. It's like playing with fire, and like it's this like very combustible thing. I've opened the door. I don't have my answers yet.
I just want to poke what's behind the door with a stick. And maybe not. That's
but I want to poke at
behind
it. Like, yeah, I want to poke at it. I also have memories. Like Jackie, you're so right about like, we might have some experiences with communicating intensely.
Well, you know, being perceived as an intense individual while communicating changes how I think for me, it changes how comfortable I am with a label being attached. I think if I were a very, you know, timid communicator, if I were to be perceived as angry in a few cases, I wouldn't be so worried about that label sticking. That's that stripe that never goes away, you know. Sorry, Molly, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's I totally feel you. Like I totally feel you about that. And like I was just thinking that like when I think through that, sometimes when I have to think through that, you know, like, oh, like what if I'm labeled as this? It actually gets added into my like rage bucket.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I got this little bucket over there and it's like, oh, all right, well we'll put that out later.
That's interesting. I like your image of a rage bucket.
I know, I'm writing it down.
Do you think
All
that,
that.
like, all right, like I just am always just trying to be like, all right, if you do this, then what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like it feels like a flow chart. And then like if I successfully get to the outcome that I wanted, I'm like, great. And then if I didn't, I'm like, oh man, I gotta add another layer to the flow chart.
Yeah.
For me, like I'm like, well, but what I guess it comes back to like, but what are you gonna do? You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like certain stuff is that like other people's perceptions and other people's choices about
Yes.
stuff, the way that other people have been socialized, the way it interacts with the way that you've been socialized.
Mhm.
That's all stuff that's on the table. And like you're not gonna rebuild the table.
Right.
But you're gonna make steps every day, right? And I guess
Mhm.
that's where
It's also like I think I am recognizing that it's like a layer of privilege that I'm like have this rage bucket, you know,
Right.
that like it's safe for me to have a rage bucket and put it over there, you know, and not go through like I think through having a flow chart and like how can I orchestrate this or how can I make this happen in a way that's like seamless.
But see, I feel super privileged to be able to be like to have the flow chart because I'm like, all
Mhm.
right, like I know how to move through these spaces very successfully. I've got like I have a well curated collection of tools, right? And so like it's like, you know, like it's like anything else. Like you get up, you like brush your teeth, you do this stuff, like it's like a part, you know what I mean? And so like it doesn't, I mean, like if I step back and philosophically think about it, like it's like, of course it's bothersome, right? But like in the day to day, like the tools are there now, right? And so it's not bothersome most of the time. And so like in that context, I feel extremely privileged because there are other people who may say exactly what I want to say and it's not going to be taken the same, right? And so like I recognize that all the time. Like there have been a number of situations where someone has seen that I know how to move through spaces and been like, yo, I have to move through this space. How should I do it? Essentially. And it's like, let me look. This is what I think you should do. Right. And so like I feel what, you know, like given like the cards that have, like the way that I've learned how to play them, I'm like, you know what? I'll keep these cards. I don't even want to touch anybody else's card. Like, I don't care if there's like, I don't care if yours came with more stuff. I know these cards and I know how to use these cards and it's worked. Right. And so like at this point, it's just like, just I'll keep mine. Don't touch them. Right. But I feel like being able to be in that situation at all is a huge privilege.
That's making me think about, you know, Brittney Cooper's descriptions of her interactions with female friends as a child and, you know, just like the tools you have, right? And trying to, you know, when she was moved into the advanced classes and her mom was worried about her losing friends. And now here's this child who's expected to navigate these difficult social circumstances where, you know, she's trying to make friends with kids who have more privilege than she does and not be labeled. I don't know where I was going to go with that, but it was just making me think about it.
What were you hoping we'd talk about from the book that we did not talk about today?
Kind of look at it on my phone, look at the chapters.
I think.
There's just so much in this book. I'm gonna have to listen to it again.
Yeah, I feel like each chapter could be its own
Mhm.
hour-long discussion. I mean, that or could be an essay. I mean, it works really well to have them all together and they build on each other, but you could definitely dissect each chapter.
It's not a
for
last 5
conversation.
minutes. It's not a last 5 minutes type of conversation, but I just have in my. It's one thing that keeps coming up in her book is she talks about patriarchy, and that being a system that's like woven through all of these layers, all these like themes, which I feel like we've touched on.
My thing that I would have wanted to talk about would be her description of empowerment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Refresh me on that. Like that was like everything else. Like whenever people have said, I'm like, I know exactly what you're talking about. But
Was that in context to when she was talking about schools and like, or like once you get an education and then you like, okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jackie.
It's like about personal responsibility, and it's like an individual responsibility to combat a system.
I feel like she was talking about when she was in graduate school and folks saying about how like the best thing to do would be like to go back to people like wasn't it like when she was talking about go back to like where you came from?
Yeah, she says
and
like
how
people
it's
who
actually
have
not. Go ahead.
Oh no, just that people who have real power are not the people who talk about empowerment. The people who have the power to make change. But yes, like how she should move back to projects where she grew up. Is that what you're talking about, Molly?
I think so.
And she's like, everybody in my life was like pulling for me to escape from that place, and now you, like Mr. Radical leftist college student, are going to tell me that I have to like move back into this place.
The quote I wrote down was, empowerment and power are not the same thing. We must quit mistaking the two. Better yet, we must quit settling for one when what we really need is the other.
Right.
And I think that's a word that you hear so often. I just liked that she kind of dug into it and the sort of confusing message it might be sending.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that like that word is used in the way that she's talking about, right? Like you hear people say like, oh, we need to empower the blah, 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 blah. But then like when you're listening to whatever came before and after that, it's like, and how does what you suggested do that? Like what you said was what you did was signal, right? What you think is correct by bringing this word and then throwing it at somebody. Like nothing that happened is like doing anything,
because the people who are talking aren't interested in giving up power, and they're not interested in transferring power, which is really what is needed. Right? They want to empower someone, but they expect that person to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and find it and do it as an individual.
When nobody does that.
You bring up a really good point, Jackie, just talking about that word empowerment, that she also, like throughout the book, just like we talked about like the word feminism, she brings up these key words that then she talks about are like connected to like neoliberalism. And one word that stuck out for me that I've been thinking about a lot was the word resilience. And she has this like knockout quote about, does anyone remember it, about like schooling and like educational systems and like calling for kids to be resilient in a situation that is like totally impossible is just like abhorrent. Like so those aren't her words, but and I've been thinking about that word resilient and other words that have that like flashiness.
Yeah, like that buzzword kind of like, this is what gets us our nonprofit grant. But like, what does it actually accomplish for people who are suffering? Like,
yeah. People get mad around those words too sometimes. Like if you're in a conversation, you don't understand what somebody is trying to say. And if you try to pick at that, like, wait, I don't understand what you're saying. People can get really mad, which is interesting, right? Because it's like, okay, but like if you think about that experience and then you step back and think about like what, like sometimes it's like, oh, okay, you're playing a different game, right? Like you are like there's a performance or like a script or something that's happening that you did not read before you went into that room, and that's why people are mad, because you're not playing the same game as other folks, right? And I think that that's one of the questions that this book is thinking about, right? Like what game are you playing, and what game do you think you're playing? And I hesitate to use that. That's kind of funny way to say it. I said that to someone once. They're like, why do we have to be playing a game? And I'm like, well, I don't know how else to say what I'm trying to say. Sorry. Why you got to smacking my words and leaving my concept on the floor though?
Molly, she talks about resiliency in children and addressing the ideas of inequality, and says, celebrating the resilience of poor folks is a perverse way of acknowledging the unreasonable demands placed upon people who already are struggling to make it.
Yes. Thank you for finding that.
And like resiliency is like, that is like, right, that term like has like in like psychology, right, like has like specific meanings. And I think people just like take that and just like make it like very vague and wishy-washy, and are just like, oh, our job is to make kids resilient. It's just like, or your job could be like getting them housing and adequate schooling and adequate resources. I don't know, like.
Well, and by definition, if you're saying children are resilient, you're saying that no action is required of you. It's a way to relieve yourself of a burden of guilt, because children are resilient, and fill in whatever you want after that sentence, but ultimately you're saying I'm not responsible for the situation, and I'm not culpable.
What did this book make you want to look more into or learn more about?
Pick one thing.
I'm kind of interested in her other book, just because I think she goes into like the history of where Black women have been contributing to the intellectual conversation but not been seen. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I think that one book, which I know that I'm on the hold list for, and I think I'm like inching, I might be in the single digits now on the hold list, is Hood Feminism. And I'm sorry that I cannot remember the author's name.
Mickey Kendall, I think, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm excited to like read that book as a follow-up to this one, as something that it seems like it's going to similarly redefine feminism in a way that right, like I mean, it's like I've always considered myself a feminist, but it's like how like there are so many dead ends there. So how do we reroute and get around those dead ends? That's what reading this especially made me interested in that.
I want to read her other book, much like you, Lucy. Actually, when I originally read this, I was like, I'll put myself on the hold list, and I actually picked it up yesterday. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, I'd like to read her other book, and I also I'm really curious about like what I wish I could know what she's reading. Reading this book, I just thought to myself, oh man, like her ability to analyze information and then like, again, make that like share a personal story, analyze, and make it accessible, was just super inspiring. And I just want to like read more from her and like learn by reading the way that she explores and like unfolds things.
All right. I think we reached our like bow for the conversation. Thank you guys. This one was super fun. But I knew when I had this group of people that all he's gonna have to do is just like puff a single question into the air. And then the rest of the conversation would just happen. So I thank you all for that. It was super interesting to hear your takes on the book. That was neat. I feel like everybody had like very specific. I feel like we were all birds sitting on different branches of the tree, which I think was kind of fun to see.
Yeah, well, thank you for
thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of your impressions. I appreciated it.
Yeah.
Thank you.